Okay, mimicking mediums has long been a rhetorical strategy of feminist movements. Feminists have often matched their empowered counterparts by co-opting platforms such as essays, resolutions, and declarations to engage in intellectual discourse with a single intended audience, men. First wave thinkers sought to reason with established power structures in order to find mutually beneficial solutions. Logic, diplomacy, social theory had merit, while emotional appeals were seen to reinforce some ingrained feminine myths. It wasn't until third wave feminism in the 1990s that women, rather than men, comprised the target audience. Riot Grrrl and the fanzine community it spawned were perhaps the first feminist creators aiming their material exclusively at women. However, abrasive and crude content about rape, sexuality, art, mental illness, and angry girl punk bands appeal to very few demographics. By that point, but that was the point. This effectively accomplished the movement's simple mission to, as the Riot Grrrl Manifesto says, save the psychic and cultural lives of girls and women everywhere according to their terms, not ours. I argue that the mediums used by Riot Grrrl more effectively prompted independent thoughts in the lives and girls of women everywhere than the jumbled voices of their community. Riot Grrrl attacked cultural ideologies in the public realm, but adapted traditional platforms in order to undermine the systemic patterns of status quo feminine notions that they found. The punk movement tells an all too familiar story about how feminine myths can reassert themselves even after they've been dealt with. All primary sources confirm that women originally comprised a large part of the West Coast punk scene. San Francisco and Los Angeles scene members remember that women bass players were almost a requirement in the 70s. It was often women who dominated and controlled the scene. Perhaps because the philosophies propagated by punk bands against establishment dovetailed perfectly with the frustrations that many women felt as they fought against cultural molds. So yes, the early punk scene celebrated a true breakdown of social mores. The popular millennial catchphrase, "you do you," is kind of the basic punk philosophy. They would resent that, but it's true. However, as the punk community began to feel pressured to embrace violent undertones of masculinity and anarchy in order to have their message heard, many women broke away. Kevin Dunn and May Summer Farnsworth, authors of We Are the Revolution, a book about Riot Grrrl, sought to pinpoint reasons why women were motivated to push away from and find their own creative spaces. They agreed that the initial punk scene was extremely diverse, drawing in males, females, transgendered individuals, straights, and homosexuals. Numerous bands contained women members, and all-female bands abounded. However, punk fell prey to the establishment that it sought to abolish. I'm getting some glares, but it's true. As the punk community became largely dominated by males by the 1980s, it was marked by pronounced sexism. Women were again being marginalized. In response, Kathleen Hanna, the frontwoman of Bikini Kill, a all-girl punk band, wrote the Riot Grrrl Manifesto. Riot Grrrl represented a publishing company, a zine, a community, and an attitude, but more than that, the Riot Grrrl movement was purposely offensive. It tore apart conventions with graphic language and hard-driving music, and its punk bands screamed with rage against male abuse, celebrated an independent female sexuality, and called for a girl-style revolution. Narrowing the definition of a girl-style revolution borders the impossible. In line with punk idealism, the founders of Riot Grrrl wanted the term Riot Grrrl to be variable, fluid, and adaptable to different situations and ideologies. In fact, many believed that over-organization would cost us the individuality we spent much of the time fighting the rest of the world for. Thorough analysis of the principles and histories and varieties of the Riot Grrrl movement would potentially fill bookstores. So rather than unpacking the rhetoric of these messages, my interest lies primarily in the mediums that the Riot Grrrl community used to react to and separate themselves from mainstream culture as well as a hostile punk scene. Communication theorist Marshall McLuhan's repackaging of modern communication coined the catchphrase, "The medium is the message." with such a simple and malleable message as self-representation, how Riot Grrrl attracted attention and spread their message had a more significant impact than the message itself. The medium needed to be louder. Riot Grrrl founder Kathleen Hanna and her network of female artists prioritized finding mediums that would disrupt the status quo but not derail daily life, as a lot of people assumed. Stepping off the stage, these musicians embraced a familiar strategy in the long tradition of feminists, spreading their word through grassroots magazines, pamphlets, and flyers. Zines, homemade, poorly produced, and amateurly written parodies of magazines, provided a forum to explore changing meanings of feminist ideology. They gave voice to a marginalized, suppressed, and frustrated girls and women whose needs were not being represented by mainstream media that was targeting them. Until the founding of Riot Grrrl Press, it could be argued that manipulating the media as a message was an unintended benefit of zine publication. However, Riot Grrrl Press fostered this approach and the diversity that came with it. They harnessed their community to a powerful central message. Harnessing their community to a powerful central message would actually undermine its purpose. Mainstream media completely missed the point. The effective action was a subversive attack to the obstacles stalling impeding social change. They presented a popularized mainstream girl power trend that spoke generically to girls across the country. Despite Riot Grrrl's feminist media approach, or perhaps because of it, reporters from the mainstream press started to pay attention. Girl power became a commodity. Girl punk bands condemned these depictions of women as shallow, flawed, and belittling. This move, responding primarily to the burden of blame for sexual behavior and sexual violence, sought to reclaim the female body from societal interpretations, and it was the fuel for much of Riot Grrrl's early efforts. Naturally, the movement drew attention away from their intended audience. Naturally, the movement drew attention from their intended audience, women, and the establishment they were criticizing. Mainstream media struggled to, or were unwilling to, conceptualize Riot Grrrl's larger aims and latched onto this bite-sized mantra, girl power, leading to dramatically different definitions. Riot Grrrl's power meant publicly tackling issues of rape, domestic abuse, women's health, sexuality, and above all, female empowerment, whereas mainstream media extolled the virtues of feminine characteristics, feigning empowerment by ferreting out even the most obscure interpretations of even the most obscure interpretations. Sorry. The effects of this loosely organized media campaign are clearly represented by Riot Grrrl's appropriation of traditional, even feminine, media platforms that would disrupt the status quo. Riot Grrrl targeted 3. Magazines were replaced by zines, homemaking skills by the punk DIY aesthetic, do-it-yourself, and media advertising by ads, visuals with cultural commentary. As Riot Grrrl gained notoriety and fell victim to mainstream media or to editorializations, and sometimes provoking them, members decided that in order to be in control of their own image, they would create a zine distribution network so that their zines could speak for themselves. It was an escalation of the manifesto's initial call to take over the means of production in order to create their own meanings. Zines were ultimately the backbone of the Riot Grrrl movement. They created an open platform for everybody who wanted to express anything. It exemplified the stigma of otherness that punk started. Sorry. Okay. So, the DIY aesthetic, sorry, I have to skip a paragraph, I mostly just talk about zines. The DIY aesthetic fought to encourage homemaking skills as they applied to how individuals wanted to represent themselves. Publishing zines about rape and cultural inequality producing unskilled music, sewing slut and whore into clothes. None of these avenues where mainstream culture was comfortable associating with women. But by embracing these girly skills, they were able to push back against the roles that they felt were being forced onto them. The free exchange of uncensored ideas created a resistant female culture. Self-representation motivated Riot Grrrl because individuality was a necessity for all those wishing to change the destructive social forces from patriarchy to corporate-controlled capitalism within society at large. Guerrilla Girls identified the destruction wrought by capitalist priorities and when they accused institutions of commodifying women. As investment in art exploded, they fought back by targeting the subject and the community of the 70s and 80s with advertisements, like there's an actual billboard they put up in Times Square, advertisements that attacked the content. In step with Guerrilla Girls' adaptation, the Riot Grrrl culture has drifted away from the tactile DIY to the cyber. Weblogs, vlogs, social media accounts, forums, these are in many ways the natural successors to zine culture. They're mediums that prize individuality, self-publishing, and the free exchange of ideas. Social media networks have created whole communities that sprung up because individuals who would never engage with each other otherwise began talking. With limitless communication available and new avenues opening daily, third wave feminism has the opportunity to change a world perspective. But how? Even at Riot Grrrl's height of production, they were severely limited. Hannah once said in an interview, networking, there's a lot of people in this world, and there are probably several who would benefit from reading or enjoying our zines but don't have the opportunity. At last, the dream is a reality, with international communities and perspectives interacting daily online. Modern zines still serve the integral purpose of self-determination. Riot Grrrl is a celebration of culture, and it's of opening avenues for girls to find new ways of expressing new ideas, or even old ideas, in a way that is personally empowering. The public realm has expanded beyond print, homemaking, and advertising. Women carry the public realm with them in their pockets, on phones, as increasingly large percentages of discourse is conducted online. Contemporary Riot Grrrl communities are perfectly primed to reinvent cultural suppositions and online mediums. Online mediums provide the perfect launching point. It cannot be denied that widespread trends infiltrate major content platforms. Riot Grrrl's message was originally heard by manipulating mainstream mediums. Potentially, new mediums could extend beyond just disrupting the status quo to new levels of discourse to new audiences. 4 women began talking to each other and spawned a zine publishing phenomenon. Harnessing thousands in instant interaction could potentially reinvent feminine myths. Thank you. What are your questions? Isaac.
So I'm curious about this idea of girl power and the mainstream media getting a hold of it. It sounded like you felt like they kind of ruined it somehow.
Yeah, so the mainstream media noticed that a lot of girls and women across the country were kind of identifying with this idea of becoming empowered as a woman instead of trying to, like being empowered in their bodies, being empowered in the things that were feminine instead of being ashamed of them or feeling limited by them.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of interpreting that as a way to represent themselves in new ways and in unique and original ways, the mainstream media kind of saw it as a way to take the stereotypical and established feminine myths of what was beautiful, what was feminine, what was fashionable, what was considered a successful woman, and they labeled it under the girl power that they co-opted. And so that girl power then becomes girl power, how to make him fall in love with you, girl power, how to rock the business suit and stuff like that, So it was still reinforcing the feminine myths, especially about appearance and sexuality, but it was doing it under the heading of like empowerment.
So you said that an integral part of this was that they didn't centralize their message. It was everyone can, express their own particular idea. How do you feel like that engages with the modern idea of intersectionality, where everyone's talking about how different aspects of feminism all need to recognize each other? We need to have, we can't just focus on white feminists. We can't just focus on able-bodied feminists. All these things where people are saying, no, we need to be more inclusive, but they kind of say like, our message has to embrace everyone. It can't just be your message and your message and your message anymore.
I think that at a certain point, yes, there is a global community that needs to be considered, and the internet certainly helps with creating those bridges. But there's also something to be said for the lack of coordination, because a major part of third wave feminism is recognizing that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for women. I mean, women are individuals. They come from different cultural backgrounds. They have different personalities. And in order to advocate for them and in order to provide them with what they view as empowerment, a lot of that needs to come from what they want to be empowered by.
Mm-hmm.
So I just was really interested what you were talking about, like, with mass media as well. I think with, like, the Free Kesha hashtag, like, have you been following that at all?
A little, yeah.
Yeah, and so I was wondering, because, like, people took that, which is all about, like, her trying to be free, and no one's really, like, the allegations of rape, but, like, it's about rape, and so it's bringing it out there, but then it kind of became, like, Taylor Swift and Demi Lovato got on it, and Demi's like, you're not really a feminist, and so, like, do you think opening up the media also opens it up to, like, critique of feminism, or, like, is there, like, one right feminism that we want
I think that it does invite a very important conversation about feminism, because we tend to forget that the other people's lives aren't like ours. I mean, we see the world through our own experience, and we see the world through like what we read and the people around us. And so for different people, they have different interpretations of feminism. There are women who the way they want to change the world is they want to educate and raise good kids that will contribute to society. And that's empowering, that's amazing. There are women who want to change the world by joining Greenpeace and going overseas, and that changes the world. And so part of I'm happy to see the debate. I think it's really important that even when you don't agree with somebody, or even if someone's oversimplifying an issue or marginalizing a conflict, there is discussion. And I don't necessarily think that anybody has kind of the right to say that someone else's feminism is wrong. That's a competition level that's often encouraged with women, like kind of who's right and who's wrong, who's better, who's worse, and like who comes out on top. And so having the discussion is really important, and the important part of participating in the discussion is being able to establish a more cooperative type of result. Does that answer your question?
For questions. Thank you.